Hello, this is Pastor Laura Cavendish, and I serve at St. Paul Lutheran Church in Asheville. And welcome. We're going to have a story and devotional time for kids of all ages. And today, our promise that we will focus on is that God will give us an inheritance. Here is our promise for today. God will give you an inheritance. Since we are God's children, we are His heirs. In fact, together with Christ, we are heirs of God's glory. And that's from Romans chapter 8, verse 17 in the New Living Translation. Now, some of you may be saying, what is an heir and what is an inheritance? Well, here we have an intro to our story today that might explain that for you. Have you ever heard the word heir? An heir, H-E-I-R, is someone who is given an inheritance, and that's hard too, usually by a parent or a family member. Okay, but what's an inheritance, you ask? Well, an inheritance is the stuff an heir gets. People can inherit all kinds of things like money or houses or gold or jewels. Perhaps your dad inherited a watch from his granddad, or your mom has a necklace from her great Aunt Ruth. Now, I have been given a ring from my husband's grandmother, and it is a wonderful early inheritance that I have been given from his side of the family. Well, you are an heir too, and not just in your family here on earth. When you are a child of God, you become an heir of God. And the inheritance your Heavenly Father has for you is amazing. It is a whole box full of sparkling promises like jewels. Best of all, that inheritance can be yours right now. How? By trusting, believing, and following God, like Joshua did. And we'll be hearing about Joshua. And just wait until you see how God gave him his inheritance. Our story for today is adapted from the 1st and the 6th chapters of Joshua. And Joshua is a book in our Hebrew Bible, that Old Testament. After 400 years of slavery in Egypt, the Israelites were free. God had rescued them, and through Moses, he led them right up to the edge of their inheritance, the Promised Land. And there God gave his people a promise. This land is yours. Take it. All they had to do was trust God's promise. The Israelites looked at the land. It was rich and good and filled with wonderful things, but it was also filled with mighty cities and powerful warriors who stomped around like giants. The people forgot all about how God had rescued them. They forgot about the plagues of hopping frogs and buzzing flies. They forgot about the Red Sea splitting open. They even forgot about the manna from heaven and water pouring from rocks. The Israelites looked at the giants instead of looking at God. They didn't trust God's promise. So God sent them to wander in the wilderness for 40 years. And then Moses died, and Joshua became leader of the Israelites. Their inheritance, the Promised Land, was still waiting for them. So God gave Joshua the same promise. This land is yours. Take it. As I turn the page, I want you to see the entire video or illustration, and then let's tell the story that goes with it. Joshua looked at the land, at the mighty cities and warriors, and then he looked at God. Joshua trusted God, and so did all the people. The first city that they faced was Jericho. With towering walls all around it, Jericho was impossible to attack. But God had a plan. For 6 days, God said, take your arms and march around the city 1 time per day. But on the 7th day, march around the city 7 times. Have the priests blow their trumpets and tell the people to shout. No weapons, no battles, just marching, trumpeting, and shouting. But Joshua and the people did exactly as God said. For 6 days they marched inside Jericho. The people peeped over the walls to watch as thousands and thousands of Israelites paraded around the city. What kind of attack was this? What were these Israelites up to? On the 7th day, the Israelites finished their first lap around the city and kept right on going. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 times they circled the city. On the 7th lap, the trumpets blasted and the people shouted, and the towering walls of Jericho crumbled to the ground. Joshua and the Israelites walked straight into the city. God gave them their inheritance, just as God promised he would. Let's talk about that story a bit. God had a dream for Joshua and the Israelites, and he has a dream for you too. Not just any old dream. It's a dream so big, so great, and so grand that your imagination just isn't big enough to hold it all. Here's the really amazing part. When you choose to become God's child, God makes you an heir and gives you an inheritance. Part of that inheritance is everything you need to make God's dream for you come true. Whatever you need, God has it. And God never runs out of anything, not wisdom, not patience, not time or energy or joy. God never waves your prayers away with an, "Oh, I'm too tired, come back tomorrow." Don't think about what you can or cannot do. Instead, remember what God can do. God can knock down walls with a shout, part rivers and seas, and tell the rain when to fall. So don't worry or be afraid. Be bold. Live like you believe God's promise. You are an heir of God, and God has an inheritance for you. And here's a promise you can make. I will not worry or be afraid, because I am an heir of God, and I know God has an inheritance for me. Before I go, I want you to see that I took this devotional resource from God Always Keeps His Promises, Unshakable Hope for Kids. The story was adapted by Tama Fortner. Max Lucado had the ideas for the devotion, and then it was illustrated by Alessia Trunfio. I finally got those names correct. Some of you really smart people have noticed that it took me 2 weeks to come back to you on a Wednesday. And that's because we're sorting out some new material that's been going out for Sunday school for our young people and for our teenagers. And I have decided to add to our online storytime videos a little more slowly. So miss you all. Look forward to seeing each other in person.